Mr Speaker, I inform the House that the Assistant Treasurer will be absent from question time today and for the rest of this week he's representing Australia at the Pacific Islands Forum Economic Ministers meeting, and the Treasurer will answer questions on his behalf.
Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why is the Prime Minister only releasing voice legislation after Australians have voted? Why does the Prime Minister continue to be deceptive and not provide the information millions of Australians are asking for?
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and yet again—
the Leader of the Opposition has asked his question.
And yet again, the Leader of the Opposition confirms that they've walked completely away from even pretending they're concerned about cost of living issues. From even pretending, Mr Speaker. The fact is this, as Chris Kenny so eloquently said, Mr Speaker, when speaking about the legislation to do with the voice, Chris Kenny has pointed out, as I have, that the coalition attack is undermined by its own commitment to legislative voice. Undermined. That is their commitment to legislative voice, and indeed they were in government for 3 terms, and for most of that term they were talking about a voice. And indeed, Ken Wyatt, the former Minister for Indigenous Australians, can't be more direct.
Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, we're being respectful to the Prime Minister, but instead of hearing about what everybody else has to say, can the Australian public hear a straight answer from their Prime Minister as to what he thinks?
Order. On the point of order, the question was about legislation but ended with a why is an allegation about the Prime Minister being deceptive. I think the Prime Minister is answering that part of the question, but I'm listening carefully to his answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
And they need to coordinate their discussions about this, maybe in their Tactics Committee, because the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, just a very short period of time ago, on the 23rd of July, said this about legislation. All legislation requires exposure drafts, it requires conversations, it requires debate. It will include all the things that actually produce good legislation at the end of the process. And that's what I want to see. That's what his deputy said, not last year, but last month, just a fortnight ago. That's what the Deputy Leader of the Opposition had to say.
Because Leader of the Nationals.
They are simply not being fair income. The conspiracy theories are colliding with each other, Mr Speaker. Because if they think the voice is a bad idea, why are they going to legislate it? If they think they have the right idea for the structure of the voice, why aren't they tabling their legislation, or didn't they, over all that period? And of course, Ken Wyatt, the former Minister for Indigenous Australians and indeed the former member of the Liberal Party, had this to say, said that he took the Karma Langton work to the Cabinet, in which the Leader of the Opposition was there, not once but twice. But nothing happened. The fact is that the Leader of the Opposition thought that saying sorry would be the end of the world. Now he thinks listening to people will be the end of democracy. Well, this is an opportunity to lift the country up, and I urge Australians to vote yes in the last quarter of this year.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. The Aged Care Royal Commission placed Workforce at the heart of its recommendations to fix an aged care system broken by a decade of neglect. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting our skilled aged care workers and building a better future for the sector?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Macon for his question and acknowledge the work that he does locally in supporting our aged care workers to provide for a better future for our older Australians. The Albanese Labor government deeply values our workforce in aged care. For too long, aged care workers were undervalued for the crucial work that they perform. But now, finally, they have a government which has their back. And thanks to the combined advocacy of the aged care workers, of the unions, of the sector and of the Albanese Labor government, this workforce was awarded a life-changing pay rise from 1 July. 15% on award wage minimums, the largest ever increase to award wages in a work value case under the Fair Work Act. And we funded this with an historic $11.3 billion investment into the aged care workforce. Just this morning, I visited aged care workers and residents at Masonic Village in the beautiful suburb of Holt, in the member for Fenner's electorate, 20 kilometres from Parliament House. There, I met workers including the always smiling Miko and Nina, who are so passionate about the privilege that they have in caring for our older Australians. Nina is a registered nurse and the care manager of the Masonic Village, and when asked about the impact of the 15% aged care wage rise, she replied, "It is wonderful. When I saw the pay rise, I said to myself, finally, we have been rewarded." Nina has worked in aged care for almost 20 years. The facility manager, Faye, described her as an absolute asset to the residents. Miko has worked in aged care for 15 years, including 7 years at the Masonic Village. She said that when the pay rise began on July the 1st, she looked at her pay slip and said, "Wow, that's great." Miko said aged care workers needed to be recognised, and that's exactly what the Albanese Labor government has done. The General Manager, Faye, said that the biggest impact she had seen to the pay rise is that since July, far more of her younger care workers and nurses want to make a career out of aged care.
That's excellent.
This wage rise is changing lives. And while those opposite wax lyrical about their supposed support for these workers now, they did not care to support these incredible workforce when they were in government for 9 long years. They had every option to do so and they chose not to.
That's right.
After a wasted decade under this coalition, the Albanese Labor government is righting the wrongs, supporting these amazing workers and building a better future for aged care. Just you wait.
Give the call to the honourable member for Flynn.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has repeatedly stated that the Uluru Statement from the Heart literally fits on one A4 page. Is the Prime Minister aware that the statement, as released by the National Indigenous Australians Agency in response to a Freedom of Information request, is actually 26 pages long, and 23 to 26 page call for the Madaraka Commission to be given all necessary powers to sit above the Parliament and Executive as an umpire in treaty negotiations?
The member for Flynn will pause. I can't hear a word the member for Flynn is saying. Members on my right will not. The member for Kingsford Smith is warned. I cannot hear the question. Anyone who interrupts during this question will remove themselves under 94A. The member for Flynn will begin his question again.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has repeatedly stated that the Uluru Statement from the Heart literally fits on one A4 page. Is the Prime Minister aware the statement, as released by the National Indigenous Agencies in response to a Freedom of Information request, is actually 26 pages long, and pages 23 to 26 call for a Madaraka Commission to be given all necessary powers to sit above the Parliament and Executive as an umpire in treaty negotiations? Why does the Prime Minister continue to be deceptive and not provide information millions of Australians are asking for?
Order. The member. The Prime Minister on point of order.
Mr Speaker, I ask that leave be given for the member for Flynn to complete all of his question on whatever time it takes, because I do want to answer this.
The member for Flynn's time ran out before he asked the question. The member for Flynn is a relatively new member. I remind all members it does cut both ways, but the question has to be in before the 30-second mark. Did the Prime Minister hear the full question?
I just will give leave for the member to ask the question.
Just
So it
the
gets
member
in
for
order.
Flynn can just make sure the question was within the 30 seconds. Order, order, and there will be silence.
The Prime Minister has repeatedly stated that the Uluru Statement from the Heart literally fits on one A4 page. Is the Prime Minister aware the statement, as released by National Indigenous Australians Agency in response to a Freedom of Information request, is actually 26 pages long, and pages 23 to 26 call for a Madaraka Commission? Why does the Prime Minister continue to be deceptive and not provide information millions of Australians are asking for?
I thank the member for Flynn. The Prime Minister has the call. Order.
I thank
Order.
the member for Flynn for his question. I do say as a new member, he should be wary if no one up the front will ask a question, because that is a conspiracy in search of a theory, Mr. Speaker. It is something that has been out there,
The member for Fisher.
like a whole lot of the QAnon theories. We have all sorts of conspiracy stuff out there, but this is a ripper. That is the Uluru Statement from the Heart on an A4 bit of paper. That is it. The first sentence in it is, we gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. The last sentence is, or the last para, in 1967 we were counted, in 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Mr. Speaker, nothing exposes the falseness of the arguments being put by the No campaign than this conspiracy theory and nonsense.
Members
They
on
put
my
in an
left.
FOI, and what they got was a whole lot of minutes from meetings with a whole lot of verbal statements from whoever to
Member for
whoever
Dunkley.
at meetings that were held right around the country. There were meetings held of
The member for Barker.
1,000 meetings held around the country, big and small, through a dialogue leading up to the Constitutional Convention, something that should have been respected. And it came up with what is an eloquent statement
for
from
Fisher
the
will
heart.
cease interjecting.
One that not only
Order.
fits on an A4 page,
Order.
but one that was signed by the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, signed by the leaders who were there at Uluru. But what we have here
Order. The member for
is
Fisher
the
will
conspiracy
cease
theories colliding
interjecting.
with each other. They're struggling to get their scares straight. I mean, what role did Marcia Langton play in the faking of the moon landing, Mr. Speaker? What was the role of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in that? This
member
is
for Broome.
absolutely nonsense. There's a whole lot of projection going on here, Mr. Speaker. More projection than a film festival. And it's coming from those opposite who do not want to debate the facts. Take what is in the Uluru Statement. That is an eloquent request from Indigenous Australians to come together as a nation. Something that
member for
after
Deakin.
the statement occurred, they established committees to
The member
look
for
at the
Deakin.
detail. This is absolute nonsense and conspiracy.
Order. The Prime Minister's time is concluded. There is far too much noise. The Minister will cease interjecting. The Minister for Industry and Science, particularly when I'm speaking. There is far too much noise on my left. The member for the... Well, just deal with the disorderly conduct for a moment. Members on my left continue to interject, and I'm looking at the member for Deakin, who has lodged the MPI today. There will be no more interjections. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I table the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the one A4 page.
Order. The member for Bowman will also cease interjecting or will be warned. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real cost of living relief to almost 2 million Australians under the government's strengthening the safety net plan? What approaches has the government rejected?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Macarthur for his question and also his advocacy for everyone in his electorate, including those most vulnerable. Of course, I am pleased that on the 20th of September, many people that rely on our social security system will receive real cost of living relief as a result of our government strengthening the safety net bill, because it has passed the parliament. Of course, it is this Labor government that is making responsible and targeted cost of living relief plans and bringing them to the parliament. Plans such as our energy bill relief, our cheaper medicines, our cheaper childcare and, of course, our extra support through our safety net measures. Of course, from the 20th of September, we will see cost of living relief flow through to many who rely on our social security system, benefiting around 800,000 people on JobSeeker, 286,000 people on student and youth payments, 1.1 million households who receive rent assistance and more than 57,000 single parents. Now, with indexation, this means an extra $56 a fortnight increase to those on working age payments. And of course, for those older Australians facing more barriers, it will be $109 a fortnight. And of course, those on rent assistance will receive the largest increase in rent assistance in over 30 years. Now, our package has been widely welcomed across the community, with Therese Edwards from the National Council of Single Mothers, who said she was ecstatic the bill passed the Senate. And of course Jessica from Woodcroft, who said after deciding to go back to study nursing as a mature-age student, the increase to Austudy means that she could stress less. She said that every dollar counts, and this increase will mean that I don't have to worry about how I'm going to pay my bills. Of course, not everyone in this place were concerned about people like Jessica. Those opposite wanted to deny this much-needed relief to so many. Of course, they tried to block the $40 increase, but of course we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised, because this is a trend from those opposite, their cruel approach to those doing it toughest. This is the party that created robo-debt, the scheme that, of course, ministers bragged that they would be a tough cop on a beat, and a legal scheme that, of course, threatened people that they would go to prison. Well, unlike those opposite, we reject the cruel approach. We want to support all Australians, including those doing it toughest, and we will continue working for a better country.
Concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
To the Prime Minister, methane emissions are 80 times more potent in trapping heat than CO2 in the first 20 years. Methane has been documented to leak or be actively vented into the air at every stage of gas extraction and distribution in Australia, and the IEA has estimated Australia is underreporting methane by up to 60%. This invalidates all commitments, including the safeguard mechanism cap. Will you legislate to properly measure and stop leaking and venting of methane?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question, and we 100% agree that methane is a very important issue, and the honourable member is correct that it is a more difficult pollutant over a period of time than carbon is itself. That is 100% correct. That is why we are engaging fully in the process of ensuring that our measurement of methane is accurate. It's not a simple matter, but we agree that there is a matter to be looked at. We've signed the Methane Pledge, which is about countries working together to see methane emissions come down globally, but we also are looking at the particular matter of methane measurement to ensure it's accurate. I've sent references
to various bodies, including the Climate Change Authority and the NGAS process, to ensure that methane measurement is as accurate as possible. That is a genuine process which is well underway, and I will update the House further when I've received further advice.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer. What have been the results of the Albanese Labor government's responsible budget management, and how does this compare to previous approaches?
The Treasurer has the call. Members on my left will cease interjecting.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Much more likely to get a question about the economy from the wonderful member from Macquarie than from the Shadow Treasurer opposite. Mr Speaker, in the spirit of the Prime Minister a moment ago quoting Chris Kenny, I thought I might start by quoting the member for Hume. The member for Hume said this. The week before the budget, he said, and I quote, "The test for this budget will be to balance the budget," end quote, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, next month we will hand down the final budget outcome and it will be better than balanced for the past year, Mr Speaker. We expect it to show a surplus just north of $20 billion. This is set to be the biggest nominal improvement in the fiscal position in the history of this Commonwealth. From a $78 billion deficit to a $20 or so billion surplus, a turnaround in the order of $100 billion in the first year of this Albanese government. Now, Mr Speaker, a stronger budget is not an end in itself, and it hasn't come at the cost of helping people who need our help, as the Minister went through a moment ago.
Will cease interjecting.
In fact, it's our responsible budget management which underpins the cost of living relief that we've been able to provide, whether it's the help with Commonwealth rent assistance or bulk billing or cheaper medicines or taking some of the edge off electricity bills. Now, this type of responsible economic management would be completely and utterly unrecognisable to the member for Hume and his colleagues over there. We wouldn't be within cooee of a surplus if we had continued down their path. We're returning 87% of revenue upgrades across our two budgets compared to 40% under them. We found $40 billion in savings in two budgets compared to zero savings in their last budget, and our responsible management is leading the first surplus in 15 years and smaller deficits over the forwards as well, and that means that the Australian people save on debt interest costs in the budget, Mr Speaker. Now, if those opposite didn't like the first time I quoted the member for Hume, let me try again, Mr Speaker. On the 2nd of May he said this, and I quote, "We need to see a surplus this year. We need to see the government focused on balancing the budget because that will help Australian businesses and households to balance their budgets, taking pressure off inflation, taking pressure off interest rates," end quote. I couldn't have said it better myself, Mr Speaker, and the final budget outcome will make that very clear. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite, they had the slogans, they had the photo ops, they were flogging those dodgy mugs on the Liberal Party website. They did everything associated with delivering a surplus except for actually deliver a surplus. The contrast couldn't be clearer. This government's responsible economic management is providing cost of living relief, taking pressure off inflation and investing in a better future while we clean up the mess that they left behind.
The member for Page will not interject, so I can hear from the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Internal talking points produced by the National Indigenous Australians Agency, released under the Freedom of Information Act, reveal that $21.9 million has been provisioned in the contingency reserve for the Makarrata Commission. Why has the government allocated $21.9 million in funding in the contingency reserve for the Makarrata Commission?
The member the member for Hume has asked his question. The Treasurer will not respond to those interjections, so I can hear from. I'll give a tip to the member for Hume. If I've mentioned you not to be interjecting, don't interject. Otherwise, I can't hear anyone. So the Minister for Indigenous Australians has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Hume for his question. I'm very pleased you've raised the issue of money. As I've said, funding has been committed to a Makarrata in line with the policy that we took to the last election. You might have noticed that. But our priority is constitutional recognition through a voice. That's what the referendum is about. Because not all governments in the past have listened to the needs of Indigenous Australians. On the weekend, I was in Arnhem Land and I sat down and listened to locals. They told me that under the last government, the community at Nhulunbuy missed out on funding for CCTV and safety lighting, despite being deemed the 26th most worthy project out of 2011. A program administered by the now Leader of the Opposition. And I think the Age summed it up. Dutton bypassed Indigenous community safety for grants in coalition seats.
Order. The member for Fisher. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Bean.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. How will the Royal Commission into Robodebt improve the public service? And how does the Minister respond to associated commentary about this?
Give a call to the Minister for Government Services and the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you. Concerning the Robodebt Royal Commission, aside from the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Cook's been short on defenders in recent weeks. But fear not, the cavalry has come. It came yesterday, in none other form than the member for Bradfield. Channeling his well-known spell as the Minister for Arts, he poured all of his creative juices into a speech criticising the Royal Commission. It's a masterpiece. He said, "A clear risk of this Royal Commission is that it will make the public service more risk-averse, less likely to think creatively and ambitiously." And he continues, "High-performing organisations in the private and public sectors encourage their people to generate ideas and to take risks. Under the member for Bradfield, we could enter a new creative revolution for the public service. Let 1,000 unlawful robo-debt schemes bloom." But seriously, it is a false binary to argue that on one hand creativity, ambition, risk-taking and ideas generation are jeopardised by obeying the law, listening to the victims, not treating welfare recipients as second-class citizens. It was an intellectually dishonest and flaccid proposition to promote the argument the Royal Commission is discredited because you sacrifice a creative public service by having a Royal Commission do a shameful chapter of public administration. It is dishonest to say that you either have a creative, innovative public service or you have an honest public service not doing robo-debt for its cabinet masters. But he did say that he found something deeply regrettable, Mr Speaker. Not the lives ruined, not the people's reputations trashed, not the laws broken. He thinks it's deeply regrettable that the government wants to hold the perpetrators to account. The Royal Commission findings are not a threat to innovation and creativity, but it's an overdue call to arms to reinstil ethics in the public service. The tone from the member Bradfield continued on. He said we should emulate best practice in the private sector. But every self-respecting board member knows that you don't take risks with other people's lives. And if you did, a self-respecting board in the private sector would have resigned in shame because of robo-debt, not that you did. The tone from the top, especially promoting ethics, old-fashioned ethics, is crucial. The Royal Commission revealed a sick culture in the government, the former government, a culture of don't ask, don't tell because we don't care. Just how dumb does the coalition think the Australian people are by trying to swallow the argument that you either have a creative public service or an honest public service? Under Labor you can have both. Under the coalition you show no learning of the robo-debt lessons at all.
The Manager of Opposition Business. Order. When the House comes when the House comes to order, hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. The Minister has previously said that the Makarrata Commission's work is, and I quote, really code for treaty without saying it, end quote. Can the Minister explain this statement?
Order. The Minister for the Environment and Water will cease interjecting. The Minister for Indigenous Australians has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Farrer for her question? And what I have to say is difficult to listen to. We support the Uluru Statement from the heart. We support constitutional recognition through a voice. We support Makarrata, and funding has been allocated in line with our election commitment. The reason that we need a voice is that for far too long, governments have made policies for Indigenous Australians, not with Indigenous Australians. And the voice can change that. We need a voice because there is a life expectancy gap of 8 years between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians.
The Minister will just pause a moment. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, the question didn't mention the voice, Minister. The question asked you with respect to explain your previous statement that the Makarrata Commission is really code for treaty. So, with respect,
Resume
the answer
seat.
needs...
Yeah. Order. 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 On the point of order, the Chief Opposition Whip. Government Whip.
Could the Speaker remind the member to address her questions through you?
So remind all standing orders not to reflect on the chair. The Minister was asked a question about to explain her comments and her statements. I'm listening to. That's up to her to answer that way as she sees fit. So I'm listening carefully to her, and she has been mentioning the Makarrata. So I'll give her the call, but I'll listen carefully to make sure her answer is relevant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have certainly mentioned Makarrata and funding allocated to Makarrata. And I was speaking about life expectancy. We need a voice because the suicide rate for our people is twice as high. We need the voice for people like Kaya, Betty and Adele Sandy, who lived at Doomadgee in northwest Queensland. All three women had been diagnosed and lived with rheumatic heart disease for years. And tragically, all three women died from complications with rheumatic heart disease in 2019 and 2020, a disease that has all but disappeared from non-Indigenous communities. Miss Sandy was 37 and she was a mother of 4 children. I know their loss is still felt in Doomadgee, and I extend my sympathies to their families and the entire community.
Give a call to the member. The Minister has concluded her answer. I'll call on a point of order. State the point of order.
I seek leave for the Minister to table the document from which she was reading. It can't be confidential, Mr Speaker, because she read from it word for word.
Order. The Leader of the House.
For reasons I don't understand, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition framed that as seeking leave, so therefore leaves tonight.
We'll just move to the next question. I'll give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Health. How will an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice assist future governments develop policies to close the gap in health outcomes for First Nations people?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank my friend the member for Robertson for his question. As he knows, later this year Australians will get the chance to vote to change our constitution to recognise the place of First Nations Australians. More than 30 years after the High Court first swept aside that long-standing fiction that this was somehow vacant land when Europeans first arrived. And I get the chance to vote also to give shape to that recognition through a voice to the Parliament. listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to get better results. And I can't think of an area of policy where that voice will be more important and more valuable than in the area of health. Because let's be honest, with the best of intentions and substantial investment from both sides of the parliament, the current approach simply isn't working. Year after year in this place, we hear the same reports of the yawning gap in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. As the Minister just said, 8 fewer years of life on this earth. Diseases unknown to non-Indigenous Australians, like rheumatic heart disease, as the Minister said. This disease of grinding poverty was eradicated in developed countries 50 or even 60 years ago, but it still strikes remote Aboriginal communities at rates higher than anywhere else on the planet, including sub-Saharan Africa, killing kids, creating lifelong disability, as the Minister just said. Young Indigenous Australians are twice as likely to die by suicide. Later in life, Indigenous Australians are 7 times as likely to die from kidney disease. And the gap in cancer death rates, has grown substantially. Now, I know, in spite of the interjections, this isn't news to anyone in this place. We've heard report after report, and I know that we all care deeply about closing the gap. But, Mr Speaker, we need a new approach. We all know that a good doctor listens carefully to their patients, but in Indigenous health there just haven't been enough careful, deep listening. Now, last week, Georgia Corrie, who is a long-standing remote area nurse, Aboriginal nurse in the Northern Territory, wrote about her work as a health professional working in Indigenous health, and she wrote this. She said, "At times it feels as though I'm walking between 2 different worlds that do not talk to each other and do not listen to each other. This is an opportunity to bring those worlds closer," she wrote, "to use this dialogue to create solutions that work for Indigenous communities." Mr Speaker, I could not agree more. A voice to the parliament and, frankly, to the Health Minister, whether they're Labor or Liberal, is a chance to turn a new page in our national efforts to close the gap.
The call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. In August 2021, the now Prime Minister promised Labor government would, as a matter of priority, establish a Makarrata Commission to develop a framework for federal treaty making because, quote, the Uluru Statement called for a national process of treaty and, quote, there can be no reconciliation without treaty. Does the Prime Minister remain committed to a national treaty as called for in the Uluru Statement from the heart?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. And of course, the issue of treaty making has been something that's been around for a long period of time. Since the Barunga Statement was one of the things that was mentioned on the weekend at Gama, and of course Bob Hawke gave a commitment to advance treaty making. Now, since then, there has been various issues done. One of those, of course, is in Western Australia. Probably the most significant one is the agreement done between Premier Barnett and the Noongar people that covered south-western Australia. But since then as well, at the moment, in Queensland, there's a process where the LNP and the ALP government have, to quote the leader of the Queensland LNP, I rise to support the Path to Treaty Bill 2023 that passed Parliament there in May. In Victoria, there's also a process, and there the leader of the Victorian National Party, Peter Walsh, said this: "The Liberals and Nationals are committed to advancing the treaty process in Victoria." In Tasmania, there's a process, and Jeremy Rockcliffe, the Liberal Premier, said this: "I am also deeply committed to delivering a pathway to treaty and truth-telling." And of course, people outside the process as well. Warren Mundine, former Liberal candidate. Can't be more.
Prime Minister will pause. The order. Members on my left, the member for Herbert. The Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question couldn't have been any clearer. Is it possible for this Prime Minister to answer just one question with a straight answer? Does the Prime Minister remain committed to a national treaty? Can you answer a question honestly?
Under the standing orders, the answer must be relevant to the question. The Prime Minister, as I'm listening, is talking about treaty process. I hadn't finished what I was about to say, but I'll listen to the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, I seek clarification from you as to whether your ruling is that the Prime Minister is in order and that his answer is relevant to the question asked.
Well, as I was explaining to the Leader of the Opposition before he took another point of order, the Prime Minister was asked about the Makarrata and does he remain committed to treaty, as called in the Uluru Statement. Under the standing orders, he is talking about treaty. He may be talking about another form of treaty. Let me finish. At the moment, I'm going to listen to his answer to make sure he is being relevant to the question. He's halfway through his answer, and I'll ask him to return to the question to make sure he is being relevant.
Absolutely, Mr Speaker, because we know that in this vast island continent that we have the great privilege of sharing with the oldest continuous culture on earth. There are 400 Indigenous nations around this country. And what we have seen is that where things work the best is when people come together. The concept of Makarrata is coming together. It's a Yolngu word, coming together after conflict. And that is precisely what has occurred with native title. It's what's occurred with the Mabo decision. It's what's occurred with all of that.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will not interject.
Indeed, Warren Mundine.
Order. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I ask that you rule on whether the Prime Minister is in order and whether he is relevant to the question asked. The question is, does the Prime Minister remain committed to a national treaty? Not some other treaty, the national treaty. Does the Prime Minister remain committed to it? And I ask that you rule on this matter.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Just to the point of order, in the first instance, points of order on relevance can only be raised once. Can only be raised once.
Order.
And if the earlier point of order was on anything else, it was out of order, because that's clearly the issue that was seeking to be raised. And secondly, the standing orders require that the answer is relevant to those terms in the question, and all the terms that the Leader of the Opposition has just referred to are being referred to in the answer, all of them.
I want to respond to the Leader of the Opposition. Under the standing orders, it clearly states that answers have to be directly relevant. That is not the same as a direct answer. That is not in the standing orders. I know that may be frustrating for members opposite, but that is the standing orders. If you wish to change that, the standing orders will have to change. But as they stand now, the Prime Minister is talking about the subject matter, so he is being relevant. And he has the call.
Much, Mr Speaker.
Order. Prime Minister will be heard in silence for the remainder of the answer.
In May 2017, Warren Mundine said this about the government of which this member was there. I've always supported treaties between governments and Indigenous First Nations. I propose the government offer each First Nation a treaty recognising them as traditional owners of their land and sea and concluding any native title claims over those areas. That was Warren Mundine talking about the advice he gave to the former coalition government.
We'll hear from the member for Page, seeking leave.
Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for earlier for tabling page 1 of the document Uluru Statement from the Heart. I seek leave to table the full 26-page document Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Order. Members on my right. The member for Page has sought leave. Is leave granted?
Leave's not granted.
The member for Boothby has the call. Order. Members on my left. The member for Page will put away his prop. Order. The members on my right, the member for Boothby has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How will an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice help to deliver better skills outcomes for First Nations Australians?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. Can I thank the member for Boothby for her question? It was great to be at Tonsley TAFE in her electorate recently, and she's doing a magnificent job. And of course, she's quite right to ask this question. Establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament is about giving the world's oldest continuing culture a legitimate stake in the policies that directly affect their communities. In particular, can I say, Speaker, there's no doubt, and I think everyone, if they were genuine, would agree that if you engage with communities, you get better results. That is the truth. So, Speaker, and I think it's fair to say never has it been more true than when it comes to education and training. Because of its transformative power, it actually changes individuals and changes communities. And that is why state and territory skills ministers, as a part of the negotiation of the National Skills Agreement, will ensure that we will be aiming to close the gap in educational attainment under that National Skills Agreement. Speaker, it's also true to say that we have had some positive progress. As I'm asked, are we doing things already? Well, we've got 4,000 fee-free TAFE places with Indigenous Australians enrolled in those courses. But there's more to be done, and that's what the other side doesn't seem to understand, Speaker. There's more to be done, but it's fair to say that First Nations people continue to face barriers to skills with tertiary educational attainment significantly lower than other Australians. That's the truth of it. If you just take one example, 47% of First Nations people aged between 25 and 34 have a 47% likelihood of qualifying for a tertiary qualification. It is 76% for all other Australians. So there's a 30% gap between the educational attainments, and we need to do much more. And it's also estimated, Speaker, that 40% of First Nations adults have minimal English literacy. It's why the government is fundamentally reforming the way the Commonwealth delivers foundation skills. Last month in Darwin, during the NAIDOC week, accompanied by the member for Solomon and Senator McCarthy, I announced a specific Indigenous stream which will engage local communities supporting 2,000 First Nations people. There's also a very good pilot run by Literacy for Life Foundation at Tennant Creek, which I visited with the member for Lingiari. And the reason why it works is it engages directly with First Nations people. But these are good but piecemeal initiatives. We need an engagement that's deeper and broader, that will be provided with if we had a voice, something those opposite genuinely do understand but refuse to support.
Give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the doctors are in the House, 85 of them in this chamber right now. 2,500 health professionals have today warned of the dire health consequences should the Middle Arm project, the gas project and fracking of the Beetaloo Basin go ahead. Will your government follow the doctors' advice, and will it withhold the $1.5 billion in fossil fuel subsidies that you have allocated to the Middle Arm project?
Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for her question, but I say with respect, it's just not right. If the member is aware of what actually Middle Arm is about, one of the projects there potentially is, yes, associated with fossil fuels, but 5 of the projects, 5 of the 6 proponents are hydrogen, critical minerals, green ammonia and solar companies, including, of course, the Sun Cable project is one of the things that will need Middle Arm in order to proceed. This will be the largest solar project in the world. In the world. And so I think in terms of the Northern Territory government, I'd encourage the member to have a look at what the Chief Minister,
Members on my left.
Natasha Files,
Member
had
O'Connor.
to say at the National Press Club, which she addressed last week, where she put forward comprehensively her case. Now, our investment is equity in public, common use marine infrastructure at Middle Arm. That's what it is, to develop clean energy industries to get to net zero. That's what our investment is about. And our investment in infrastructure projects, of course, should concentrate on nation-building projects, ones that facilitate private sector activities and ones that have a multiplier effect. And frankly, as someone who, along with the member for Kooyong, cares about climate change and cares about the need for us to get to net zero, it is important. It is important that we stick to facts in this debate, because otherwise what people will do is to walk away from the support which is there. So the Australian government's proposed investment, to be very clear, is not for any company, it's not for any product, it's for public infrastructure. That's what our investment is proposed to be, and that is why the government made that commitment going forward. And it is just not true that it is for any company or any private sector activity. So the idea that you just assert that it's the case undermines, frankly, the very good public case across the board for action to get to net zero.
Give the order. The member for Riverina. Give the call. Give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. How is the Albanese Labor government strengthening relationships with countries across the Indo-Pacific through Australia's International Development Program? What actions have been necessary, and why has it been important to update the government's policy settings?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Fremantle for his question and his ongoing advocacy for a strong international development policy. Later today, Senator Wong and I will be releasing the new international development policy, the first one in almost a decade. It will place international development at the heart of our statecraft, complementing our policing support in the region, complementing defence cooperation and the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme to secure Australia as the partner of choice in our region. Mr Speaker, 22 of our 26 closest neighbours are developing nations, and it's in our national interest to have a stable, prosperous and peaceful region. And this update is necessary because of the incompetence of those opposite when they were in power. They slashed $11.8 billion from our foreign aid budget, creating a vacuum filled by other nations in the region at a time of great geostrategic competition. We're rebuilding the aid budget and driving our policy based on our values and the priorities of our region. That includes prioritising local economic involvement. So when we fund infrastructure projects in the region, they use local labour in contrast to other countries. We're establishing a $250 million Australian Development Investments Fund to stimulate private sector impact investment in our region. We're matching this with unprecedented transparency and evaluation mechanisms to give confidence to our taxpayers that their funds are being invested wisely, and we're requiring 80% of our programs to have a gender and climate change objectives in their design. And on climate change, this is incredibly important because for the Pacific, climate change is the #1 existential threat and their #1 priority. And the truth is this is necessary because the last government undermined our position in the region by not taking climate change seriously, including the Leader for the Opposition making jokes about rising sea levels. And I'm ashamed to say that we still need to push back on these attitudes of those opposite, and that's why this policy is so necessary. Senator Canavan today, in response to our foreign aid announcement, said talking about climate change was a Western eccentricity, a Western obsession. Now, Mr Speaker, this undermines our position in the region. It creates a vacuum for other countries to fill and shows that those opposite are not serious about governing. By contrast, our international development program supports our national interest, supports our efforts to be the partner of choice for our region and contributes to our national security.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister remain committed to a national treaty, as called for in the Uluru Statement from the Heart?
Order. The member for Lyons. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, the scare campaign is running out of steam, Mr Speaker. It's like a deflated whoopee cushion, Mr Speaker. It's made a loud noise. It's a bit uncomfortable. But then they've just moved on and on and on, from one thing to the other. We've had a range of them, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition said the Voice will re-racialise our nation. He's seemingly unaware of the racial provisions that are in the current Constitution. Seemingly unaware. The former Deputy Prime Minister went one further, said this: you know you're losing the argument. And there have been a few, Mr Speaker, but there's only one of them would have said this. Because you know the old saying, this is what he said: the Voice will be a delineation of people and their rights. The Civil Service Act of Germany in 1933. That was the member for New England.
The member for New England is also seeking the call, but I'll hear from the member for Wannon first of all. Well, member for New England, I'll just do one at a time. Order. Order. Members on my right.
Thanks, Speaker. The question was very clear. It was about a national treaty. Now, do you stand by your commitment for a national treaty or not?
Resume your seat. You haven't stated what the point of order is. I'll resume your seat. All right. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. All right. We got there in the end. Is the member for New England still? Okay. The question was about the Prime Minister's commitment to a national treaty called for in the Uluru Statement. Order. As I reminded members in the last question, the Prime Minister needs to make his remarks directly relevant. Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition had some time out yesterday. I'm sure she wants to stay for the remainder of question time today. Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Uluru Statement itself, on the one page, says, "We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement-making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history." Well, we're in the post-truth world over there, Mr Speaker, the post-truth world. Indeed, Senator Cash tried to up the Barnaby Joyce comment and said this: if we put the Voice in the Constitution, we're effectively announcing an apartheid-type state. That is what they have had to say. The Deputy Leader said the Voice can take a view on everything, from submarines to parking tickets.
Order. The member for Herbert and the member for O'Connor will cease ejecting. We've had one point of order on relevance. I'll hear from the Leader of the member for New England.
You flatter me. Mr Speaker, at the very least, he could use the proper term on the member for New England, not my name.
The Prime Minister, I'm sure, will ensure that he uses the correct titles at all times.
Speaker. But the Leader of the Opposition, and this might go to why he's objecting here. He said this to justify his opposition. It's not just the voice, it's about truth-telling. That got him worried over there, Mr Speaker. That got him worried over there. But of course, Senator Hanson said it would turn the Northern Territory into an Aboriginal black state.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting as well. There is far too much noise today. Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, my question is to you as to whether you will rule this particular contribution out of order. It is clearly out of order, Mr Speaker, and it is defying your earlier remarks. I haven't finished, Mr Speaker.
Order. The Leader will just pause. Order.
Mr Speaker, I just, for the benefit of the House, the question was this. Does the Prime Minister remain committed to a national treaty, as called for in the Uluru Statement from the Heart? It was nothing beyond that, Mr Speaker.
Yeah.
Now, can this Prime Minister answer a question honestly or not?
All right.
And can you please, Mr Speaker, provide a ruling as to whether he's in order or not?
Resume your seat. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I simply draw your attention that a point of order on direct relevance can only be raised once. The Leader of the Opposition knew that, decided to use a point of order for the purpose of making a speech which he knew was out of order.
The member for Petrie would like a go as well. Order. You'll need to state the point of order, not give a commentary or a
just
statement.
to you, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order.
Yeah, just to you, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the House is incorrect. The opposition leader was asking you to rule on a point of order. It wasn't on relevance at all.
Order. Order. The member for Petrie can just resume his seat and not take any more points order for the rest of the week. The order. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I simply also raise that questions to the Speaker are something that doesn't happen during question time, but if questions to the Speaker are asked, they're asked at the end of question time and on administrative matters.
The Prime Minister has 30 seconds remaining to his answer. I'm just going to say I need him to be relevant to the question, and he has the call, and if he is not relevant to the question, I will call him to order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition in his statement made reference to Uluru's Statement from the Heart, which was in the question. The member for New England actually said in May, this might be the last budget we have if this craziness got up. There's not going to be any budgets. But perhaps the Leader of the Opposition might want to think about this statement.
Order.
The Prime Minister's obsession with the voice means that he's taken the eye off the ball when it comes to economic policy. No economic questions in here, Mr Speaker. We know who's obsessed.
The Prime Minister's
just
time
them.
has concluded. I'll hear from the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship. What steps has the Albanese Labor government taken to stamp out migrant worker exploitation after a decade of inaction?
Give the call for the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Werriwa, my friend, for this question and acknowledge her keen interest in dealing with this scourge, because she knows, as all of us know on this side of the House, that there is a crisis in exploitation of migrant workers in this country. Too many workers have been forced to confront vulnerabilities that are created or exacerbated by failings in our visa system. Unscrupulous employers and facilitators in the labour market have misused visa rules to exploit workers, and according to the Grattan Institute, up to 1 in 6 recent migrants are being paid less than the minimum wage. Now, of course, this didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen all by itself. When the Leader of the Opposition was the minister responsible, he oversaw a complicated, slow and unplanned mess when it came to how people enter this country. Under his watch, also, despite all the tough talk, immigration compliance disappeared. It disappeared. It licensed an exploitation that's hurting every Australian. Businesses doing the right thing, Australian workers whose wages and conditions are being undermined, and it's also a handbrake on productivity growth and economic growth more broadly. And this is a problem that those opposite ignored for years. For years. The report of the Migrant Worker Task Force was handed to the former government in 2019. And when the then Immigration Minister finally introduced a bill to respond to the recommendations of the report, it never was brought on for a vote. Now, in this government, we are doing things differently. We are working each and every day to undo a decade of neglect when it comes to protecting migrant workers from exploitation. Right now, we are taking immediate action while looking ahead with my friend, the Minister for Home Affairs, for future reform to engineer this out of our system. Border Force have just completed an operational visit inspecting 300 businesses, repaying the investment of $50 million in enforcement. And we've introduced the Strengthening Employer Compliance Bill into the House to target dodgy employers and also help migrant workers speak up. This will implement the key recommendations of the Migrant Worker Task Force. Now, yesterday, the Shadow Minister acknowledged the bill has broad support, and so the opposition has given in-principle support. And I hope, Speaker, that they will stick to their principles on this, because we know the Shadow Minister has a record of flip-flopping when it comes to his principles when it comes to migration. He can't decide whether we should have more or fewer skilled migrants. Well, depending on the audience he's speaking to, of course, Mr Speaker. A month ago he said we should be doing everything we can to support skilled workers to make their home in Wannon. But this week he's telling migrant workers to go home. Yesterday he said you come in, you fill skill shortages, then you go home. It seems he's got one set of principles when it comes to his electorate and another for the rest of the country, Speaker. Let's see whether he can stick to his principles when it comes to a vote.
Call to the honourable member for Griffith.
Question to the Prime Minister. National polling shows 74% of Australians support the federal government to work with National Cabinet to coordinate rent caps, while 80 housing, legal and welfare organisations, including Marrickville Legal Centre in your electorate, have signed a letter calling for national renters' rights and rent caps. With rents now rising the fastest in 35 years, Prime Minister, will you finally take responsibility, listen to experts and the majority of Australians and coordinate national caps on rents and stronger renters' rights with National Cabinet?
The member for Spence. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Griffith for his question, which goes to his blocking of the Housing Australia Future Fund, which goes to his reason he puts up for that, which in this chamber, of course, about renters, but what he puts in writing is more straightforward, because he speaks about the need to continue a national door-knocking campaign. He says, to quote him, "This parliamentary conflict helps create the space for a broader campaign in civil society." He also says
the member for Griffith on a point of order.
Asked about renters, not the Prime Minister reading my Jacobin articles. The point of order is on relevance, Mr Speaker. We don't need to hear the Prime Minister's talk about my Jacobin articles. We need to hear about renters.
Resume your seat. I just ask all members, if you're using that as a point of order, do not give commentary. Just go straight to the point of order. I'm listening carefully to the Prime Minister in continuation.
For the member for Griffith, I'll give him the big tip. Don't put it in writing in an essay if you don't want people to read it and quote it back to you. He went on to say, allowing the HAP to pass would demobilise the growing section of civil society. That's what he speaks about, all a political campaign. Now, I understand that renters are doing it tough. But I also understand that in Australia's federation, the Commonwealth does not control rents. The Commonwealth does not have the capacity either to abolish the private rental market. And the key to fixing up these issues is supply. And that is what we are dealing with, including $2 billion that we put additional money into social housing, including the measures we put in the budget that will result in between 150 and 250,000 additional private rental dwellings being built, including the $2 billion that we have allocated for additional community housing, including the $1.6 billion for the one-year extension of the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement. Now, Commonwealth and State Ministers, we will have National Cabinet meeting next Wednesday. And on the agenda next Wednesday is the issue of renters' rights. But what is there is in a context of a practical move. We won't be nationalising private housing in this country. We won't be doing things that make it more difficult rather than less difficult, which is what the member opposite would do if he had his way. But I say to the member, if he is at all fair income, vote for, break up this coalition over there between the Liberals, the Nationals, One Nation and the Greens in the other chamber, and vote for additional housing. Vote for additional housing. I understand that you never do it in your own local electorate or local community, but at least do it nationally.
The call to the member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What is the role of political leaders in advancing reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Aston for her question and for the extraordinary work that she's done in her short time here in this chamber as the best member for Aston in a very long period of time. And I attended the Garma Festival on the weekend. That is the major celebration of Indigenous culture held anywhere in this country. And it's not, as the Leader of the Opposition suggested, some narrow fest. Indeed, there was the member for Barrow was there, the member for Calare, a number of crossbench members from the Greens and independent members were there as well. And it was an opportunity to listen to what Indigenous Australians were saying about these issues. And the Leader of the Opposition has spoken about those places: Palm Island, Leonora, Laverton, East Arnhem Land and Alice Springs. And he said that he's consulted Indigenous Australians. Well, this is what they have said about that. James Calhoun, a Martu man from Meekatharra, there in Leonora, said no one has actually spoken about the voice to us in those visits from Peter Dutton. Geraldine Hogarth, the local leader, said, Geraldine, I advise you to go for it. Say yes, because you might have to wait for the next 100+ years for another referendum. That's what Geraldine says that the Leader of the Opposition said to her. Peter Craig, the Mayor of Leonora. Peter Dutton wasn't there to talk about the voice. In Central Australia, Matthew Palmer, the Chair of the Central Land Council. I will campaign for a big yes vote in the referendum, because when we are being heard, we will achieve positive change on the ground in Alice Springs and in the bush. That's what he had to say. In Katherine, Samuel Bush-Blanasi, the Chair of the Northern Land Council, we say, listen to us and we will help making things better so we can close the gap. We say, listen to us before making policies that affect us. Please stop ignoring us. Palm Island that he visited. This is what Elizabeth Clay had to say, one of the elders. All I knew about the visit of Peter Dutton and Phil Thompson was half an hour before they were about to board a bloody plane. He should support the voice, but we don't expect him to. He'll oppose everything. The Mayor of Palm Island, Ms Lam Sam, I definitely support the voice and going ahead. East Arnhem Regional Council, supports the policy position
Order.
for the constitutional recognition of Indigenous people and direct First Nations voice to the federal parliament.
Members on my left, the member
Mr.
for Herbert.
Speaker, they won't
Order.
listen to Ken
Member for
Wyatt.
Gippsland.
They haven't listened or consulted Indigenous
Order.
Australians.
The
They're
Prime
attempting
Minister's
political advantage
time
at their expense.
has
And on that note, she's been placed on the notice paper.